Hello and welcome to Sounding Board, a community access television production of Seroptimus International of Novato. My name is Madeline Peters and my guest today is Dr. Lyn Webb, and I'll have her provide a little more background information in a moment. But first, just a little bit of information about our organization. Seroptimus is an international organization that is global, and its mission is to advance the status of women and girls both locally and internationally. Lyn, thank you very much for being here. Your topic is, do I hear what I think you're saying? And I know you've been very instrumental in your career in looking at language, especially language in South Africa, your country, and at Nelson Mandela University where you're a professor. Could you please just say a little bit about yourself and introduce yourself to our viewing public?
It's a pleasure to be here. As Madeline has said, I teach at Nelson Mandela Metropolitan University, and I'm particularly interested in second language teaching. And just a little bit of history about our South Africa. Early in the 1800s, the Dutch and the English fought for domination over the Cape of Good Hope because it was pivotal in getting succor to the sailors on the way to the trade routes. So the struggle for language rights is interconnected with the struggle for human rights in South Africa.
I didn't realize that connection. Obviously, I had been aware through our conversations and through visits to South Africa of the critical importance of language and languages in South Africa. But I thank you for bringing up that historical context.
Well, from the Dutch, Afrikaans emerged, and obviously the English from the English settlers. Most of you will be quite conversant with these very iconic photographs of the language struggle on the 16th of June 1976, when the students rose up in revolt against Afrikaans becoming the language of learning and teaching.
That was the issue, that Afrikaans was going to be the language, but that was not going to be the language that would advance the people of South Africa. It would be English. And so the revolt had to do with the choice of language of instruction, the language at the university level.
Absolutely. Afrikaans has come to be seen as a language of apartheid, a language of oppression. English is a colonial language, obviously, and it's spoken by only about 8.2% of our population. Interestingly enough, it is election day today in South Africa.
Okay.
And it is 20 years after Mandela cast his historic vote. And my thoughts are back in my country at this point in time. In South Africa, the majority of our schools choose to teach and learn in English, even though it is not their home language. English is, in the rural areas, it's seen as a foreign language because there are no newspapers, there are no televisions. It is a language that they don't hear, as opposed to the students in the more urban areas where they have billboards, they have newspapers, they have TVs. So we have two very different views of English in South Africa, as seen by the population that doesn't speak English as their main language. So what we have done in research at NMMU is we have taken about 200 students who are teachers of maths and science and who are learning for a further qualification. And we wanted to find out what their perceptions were about language, about teaching in English, assessing in English, when their learners and their home language is not English.
So these are the people that you're working with, are the students, are the teachers, and as you said, in the areas, and so you're examining their perceptions, sort of their viewpoint on the differences or their feelings around English and English instruction and their
Exactly.
native language.
Exactly.
Okay.
And particularly in maths and science, a teacher has a dilemma. Basically, a moral dilemma. Do I teach my students English? Because that's the way they're going to get jobs. That's the language of access. Or do I teach them maths and science? And Neville Alexander, who has been an amazing person in South Africa, said, and I quote, because of the hegemonic position of English in the world today, because it is the key to social mobility, to upward social mobility, people understandably and justifiably want their children to learn English in South Africa. What most people don't understand is that it doesn't follow, therefore, that they will acquire the best command of English if they're taught from day one through the medium of English. This does happen, of course, but it happens only under very specific conditions, conditions which don't exist in most South African schools, certainly not in most black schools. And this is what we're working with, the majority of children in black schools who are learning from day one, well, basically, in English because they need English.
And that's the language of transition. That's the
Yes.
language of access, as you put it, the path to a more successful career, to transition, themselves academically and emotional and economically as well.
Well, that's what I'd like you to hear, is how our teachers, our maths and science teachers, and I want to emphasize that they are not literature students, how they express their feelings, their perceptions about using English. But first of all, I would like to just pay tribute to a couple of people. First of all, to Leslie Foster, who initiated this poetry project, to Kazeka Kakuza, who is the most amazing woman, to whom I gave the book of poetry and I said, read this. Some of it is written in isiXhosa, some of it is written in English, some of it is written in another language. Choose some poems and tell me how the poems speak to you. Mm-hmm. And you will hear her commentary on the poems, and that is the power. She is giving voice to these teachers. And then there are two exceptional young men, Suzeku Pami and Sipho Mzatse, the musicians who share their souls and their magic with us. And then, of course, I salute the teachers. And I'd like us to hear their voice rather than mine.
Okay.
There are three themes that I'd like you, as you listen to these teachers, to think about. Power, which includes the political nature of language, the identity, and the access. And I want you to understand that there was no prompting of the teachers, no prompting of Kazeka, but these three themes just keep coming up. Power, identity, access. With power, we've got the duality of the power. We've got the neo-Marxist power of the power over, where I have power over you and I can get you to do what I want. And that's not what we're wanting. We're wanting Foucault's idea of power, where the power comes from within.
Correct.
Where you have the internal locus of control. And that's what we're trying to engender in our teachers and in our students.
Well, I can see that this is a monumental project, and it's also one that is universal too. Whereas you're using poetry and authentic language and the perspective of the individual people that you mentioned, there's a universal theme to this too as well.
I hope so, Madeleine, but it's not for me to draw that comparison. I am South African through and through, mm-hmm. and it's up to other people to hear the synergies and to hear the teachers' voices speak to them. Not for me. I am just overwhelmed mm-hmm. by what they say. As far as identity goes, we know that diversity is the norm. Here I have seen diversity in classrooms, diversity at the university, and we know that our identities are formed by where we belong, in the groups that we belong in, the various different groups. And we also know that our identities aren't fixed. And we know that the identities of these teachers and of their students change as they use different languages because they think differently in different languages. And there is a very beautiful picture that Hilary Janks produces in her book Literacy and Power. And it's a picture of a grade 3's idea of a playground. And it is rich, and it has children playing hopscotch and trees blooming. And in South Africa, we have this wonderful way of demarcating different areas with tires cut in half and painted white. So we have the white paint, and it's beautiful. You can see the joy and the movement in the playground. And then she asks these children, write what you have drawn. And immediately they say, our playground. We light, we clean. And she says, and I quote, the rest are mute, robbed of language. In small groups where these same children are allowed to use an African language, these same children come alive. The group dynamics change. There's a flood of ideas as the children are rescued from the silence imposed by English.
It's amazing to me to hear you tell this story. It's, on one hand, as an outsider with just very limited experience in South Africa, I was quickly aware of the power of language and the importance placed on English, but not aware of the detrimental impact on children's sense of self. And certainly in your discussion right now, that's what's becomes very alive for me, is that silencing the promotion of English is the silencing of the voices of the individuals, of the children, of the richness and the vastness that represents the identity of South Africa.
So let's hear their voice.
Okay.
Isikhalo somntwana. Ingaba ndinantoni? Ndiva isikhalo somntwana esithi andisiva isilungu, ndiva isixhosa. Kodwa mandifunde isilungu, mandifunde. Ndoyaphi na, ndothini na ngaphandle kwesilungu, ulwimi lwezwe lonke. Sona sikuvulela iingcango eziya enkulekweni, mandifunde, the sky is the limit. Basically, this poem is saying the cry of a child. Isikhalo somntwana is the cry of a child. And this young man in the first paragraph is saying, what will I be? I hear this cry of the child, and saying this cry is, I don't understand English. But everyone keeps on saying, I don't understand English, but I understand isiXhosa. This is what I hear. I don't hear English, I hear isiXhosa. But everyone keeps on saying that I must learn English because it will open the doors to opportunities, especially in a democratic situation. So, and everyone is drumming to him that he must be educated. And where will he go if he doesn't know this English? And then he says, that he must be educated, and the sky is the limit. I would love to hear this writer, because does it mean that being educated is only in English? It moves you to your essence. It's that type of poem.
That's very powerful. Just listening, first of all, in the home language, and then the speaker's background knowledge and interpretation and understanding of what's going on. It's like it brings that into sharp focus, that the children's cry, it's almost a cry, it is, to be heard and to not obliterate all that they bring from their families, their background, their culture, even though they understand that learning English is a door opener, or could be a door opener. There's something that's lost by that demand that takes away from the children and their joy and their own voice.
And we're finding that there is a great deal of rote learning. that there's in our classes, because they do not understand the English, there's repetition, there's memorization, there's recall, there's chorus teaching, and there's no real learning and understanding going on. And this is what we're trying to break. We're just trying to break that cycle of trying to memorize in order to pass the test. We want to get the understanding, and we want to get the home language, the main language, the first language brought into the schools and acknowledged as a tool, as a resource in the classrooms.
What you're describing is actually very similar. You know, I work with students who are doing their research, and they're addressing the ability to kind of, for children to preserve their culture, their heritage. Because certainly in the United States, not certainly every place, but children come to schools from different family backgrounds, different language backgrounds, but the focus is to learn English. But at what cost? Do they deny their language, their culture, their family? Or is there a way to maintain, preserve, and honor that as they add a second language or a third language to their background?
Exactly, and that is hopefully that in some way we can create a dialogue between us where we have such similar problems, and there are ways that we can help the teachers and the students.
Well, I can see that your position, your passion, obviously you're very passionate about this. This comes across in our conversations both before today and right now, is there with really understanding the fabric and culture and diversity of South Africa, really understanding the importance of an educated populace, but not at the expense of denying one, their background, their culture. That's very similar. Not quite as poignant, perhaps, or as divisive as my understanding is, given the stories you tell. But there's very similar, there are certain similarities here, too. One doesn't have to abandon one's background.
Absolutely.
I see. So I can imagine in your role in working with teachers that this is something very profound that you wrestle with perhaps as a professor, and that the students wrestle with as they prepare to enter the teaching force, and anticipating what they need to do in order to work effectively with the children who are in their classes.
Certainly. And I'd like you to just listen to this next poem, which actually is in English and...
A poem. I think and dream isiXhosa. My home language, I love isiXhosa. Although I can't communicate worldwide, it is my roots, my culture, my identity. It is my Ubuntu. I love my home language. I study in English, language international, recognition worldwide, power, secret, comfort, employment, status, relief, all represented in English. I respect my second language. It makes me feel literate. Bilingualism, a strange word existing within one me.
In all these poems, there was a theme that came out that was very positive, and yet a theme that came out that was very negative. And one of the most important things was the dichotomy between the cultural capital that their home language gives the learner, the student, the teacher, and yet this culture is dissipated. And what is happening is, because of this hegemony of English, that children are denying their background, and a lot of the richness of their heritage is being lost. And I think that is the huge tragedy that we are facing at the moment in South Africa, where if you have the means, you are sent to an English medium school because it is probably better resourced, but it's because of the language. They want to be steeped in the language. It's a problem, and
My language is powerful. My language is powerful but not wonderful. Full of clicks and sounds that are not heard, deep and dignified but not respected, misused, mispronounced, and misspelled on TVs, newspapers, billboards, notices, and signs.
Although there's a sense of disenfranchisement in that previous poem, I think that this next poem actually just balances it out, and that is the nature of the people in South Africa. There's a positive and there's a negative. And here they're told to speak your language without shame.
Umbongo ngolwimi. Ulwimi lwenkobe sisiXhosa sinxibelelana ngolwimi. Isizwe ngasinye siyazinca ngolwimi lwaso. Zilishumi elinanye iilwimi ezisemthethweni apha eMzantsi Afrika. Sifunda ngolwimi. Lwazi ulwimi lakho, luxabise ulwimi lwakho, luthethe ungagqithisi. Well, Memese here, she's just saying that, ulwimi lenkobe, sisiXhosa, saying your mother tongue. If you had to translate mother tongue from direct English to direct Xhosa, it would actually mean ulwimi lukamamako, but it's not said like that. That's a wonderful thing about the Xhosa language. It's more experiential. They describe the experience and come up with the language. So when they say ulwimi lenkobe, inkobe is that corn that your mother makes, usually in traditional society. So that meal and that those corns that your mom makes, and then that's where it says ulwimi lenkobe, meaning your mother tongue. It's the experience. It's attaching the experience of making your corn with your mom. And then that's how, isn't it beautiful? And then he goes on to say, he goes on to say, ulwimi lenkobe sisiXhosa, it's how we come to understand each other, it's how we come to communicate with one another. And languages and nations, ngasinye siyazinca ngolwimi lwabo, meaning nations take pride in their languages. And then he says, in the second paragraph, the poet says, zilishumi elinanye, meaning there are 11 languages under the constitution, under the law of South Africa. So language is part of our identity, in that we study in language. And then it goes in the last paragraph to just encourage you to know your language, value your language, speak it without shame.
We're down to just a few minutes left in our program. I think one of the things that's very striking to me is you talk about the kind of education, the English system and the rote learning, and yet from the poetry, it's very rich and profound and experiential. There's a dichotomy between the access to English and the way it's taught. And what happens as a result of that, a loss of self. That's, again, because the home language or the mother tongue is not respected. Yet when people speak in the mother tongue, you hear the richness of lived experience, that experiential learning that you probably are hoping and trying to promote within the educational setting as well. Do you have anything that you would, we could go on and have a conversation for a long time. I certainly can see the universals with the story that you've been telling us today. But is there anything that you would like to kind of emphasize as far as your work and the role of these teachers in working with students in South Africa?
I'd like to pick up Kazeka's last statement, speak your language without shame. I would like our teachers to encourage our students to use their home language not as a teaching tool. As Neville Alexander said, we've got to use English because that is the door. But when we are expressing our understanding, that's when we need to use a language that we're comfortable in. And we need to be able to use our home language, our main language, our first language, as a resource in the classroom. And if we can get our teachers worldwide to use the language as a resource, rather than, as we see so often, everything is in English. Our assessments are in English only, and we need to be able to give our learners the scaffolding of a home language, and a home language that gives them succor, warmth, identity,
Right.
power.
Lyn, your discussion today is really amazing and touches on many, many levels. Certainly, I'm just thinking back on my own experiences and my own work in education as a teacher and working with other people who are studying to be teachers, and the connection that teachers need to make with their students, and the respect, bringing a sense of respect into the teaching and also a sense of identity. I want to thank you very much. I know you've had a very, very busy schedule here in the United States, and I certainly value my connection to you, and I do sincerely appreciate your taking the time to share a perspective that really feels close to home to me, as you describe your work in South Africa. Thank you again. Again, this is Sounding Board, a community access television production of Seroptimus International in Novato. Thank you very much.